Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. Bluegrass Jam Along is also brought to you by Token Picks, individually machined guitar and mandolin picks to bring out the best in you and your instrument.
We had this class called critical listening, which was like, you're going to listen to this frequency and see if you can closely pick out what it is. But then some of it was like, bring in a recording that you think is a good example of drums or vocal sound or whatever. And my professor was very into like Steely Dan, and that was not at all my interest. I would bring in examples of things that I thought were good, and he would be like, that's like a 3 out of 10. You know, it's like, this is a terrible recording. The drums are blown up or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, I don't know. When I put it on in the car, I turn it up and I sing along and it feels good.
Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. My guest this week is Sean Sullivan. Sean is a 5-time Grammy award-winning engineer, mixer and producer. He's based in Nashville, worked with all sorts of people from Sturgill Simpson, McCoury Band, Michael Cleveland, Andrew Marlin, Molly Tuttle, Steeldrivers. Lots and lots of names you would recognise. He worked at the Butcher Shoppe Studio, which is owned by John Prine and David Ferguson, up until it closed in 2020. And after that, he moved to the Tractor Shed, where he recorded one of my favourite records of recent years, which is the mighty Poplar record. We chat about how he got into recording and his background, which definitely wasn't in string band music, and how he sort of transitioned into that, some of the sort of challenges along the way, what he learned from working at the Butcher Shop, how Tractor Shed has sort of partly been shaped around him and the way he works, and he's contributed to building that. Really fascinating conversation about, I guess, like what matters in music, really, because we talk about recording and we talk about, you know, all the things that go into making a record, but also how some records that are far from perfect are just still the best records. And we talk about what Sean sort of learned in his training as an audio engineer and the things that he sort of agreed with, the things he didn't. And it's fascinating just hearing somebody's approach to all this. Everybody has a different approach, but just hearing how Sean approaches kind of engineering and production and working with musicians, really, really fascinating conversation. I enjoyed this one a lot. I'll stick a link in the show notes to the Tractor Shed Studio so you can have a look at it. But that is it. I will let you crack on and have a listen to my interview with Sean Sullivan. Sean Sullivan, welcome to Bluegrass Jam Along. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Appreciate it.
I'd love to hear your kind of journey into working in the string band world as a kind of audio engineer, because it's not a world you necessarily grew up in, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, I never really listened to string band music or bluegrass music until I started working in it. So my familiarity with bluegrass and string music is pretty much just from the people that I've worked with.
So what is your background?
I kind of got into playing music myself as like a preteen, young teen. I played guitar but I didn't really take it very seriously in terms of like a career path. It was more just like wanted to have a rock band with my friends. So my like education of music was pretty much like learning C, G, and D, and then I was like, I'm good. I've got all the tools I need to start a band. Yeah, and I was always interested in technology as a kid. Like, I'm 39, so I'm kind of was at that age of computers kind of entering our lives. And I had a close friend who was an electrical engineer and kind of taught me how to build computers. So it was sort of this like intersection of, I had a band and I wanted to play shows and I needed music, and recording sort of put those two interests together of messing around on the computer and being able to record my band so you could send demos and things to get gigs. And I had really great parents who were very encouraging of letting me play music, and we rehearsed in the basement, and we would book shows, and usually I would like send a demo but not say how old I was. If like a band was in town that I wanted to see, not old enough to go, maybe we can open the show. So I spent a lot of like time, and I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and time going downtown at a young age and playing shows with an X on my hand, and disappointing bar owners that I can't bring any friends because they're all underage, and I'm 15 or 16 myself. So, but in that, I guess in that process of being in bands and stuff, I knew that I wanted to do something in music as a career, and engineering really spoke to me.
Yeah, I'm that bit older, and when I was in bands in my teens and 20s, it was all kind of 4-track cassette recorders, and the idea of recording anything onto a computer just wasn't available to us at that point, really. Was that kind of your route from the start, straight into digital?
I mean, I think the first thing I had was the Porta Studio cassette recorder, that was $100. And I think enough time has passed that I wouldn't get in trouble for this, but I was kind of had quote unquote stolen versions of some recording software. Like I had Cool Edit Pro, which was like Adobe's multi-track, and I ended up just getting like a simple digital interface, like a USB $100 thing. But then you had sort of unlimited overdubs, or, maybe it was 8 or 16. So it kind of let me like build tracks. And there was this really amazing older community in Cincinnati, like in playing in bands and doing original music. I think it was sort of like charming and entertaining to some older bands that were like, who are these kids that like I was kind of like a, I don't know, indie rock, I guess. And kind of took me into their wing, because that was of like different people who recorded themselves and their bands. And, so I was always kind of like the kid hanging out with older musicians, and my tastes were always a little advanced, I guess, for like a 14, 15-year-old, and varied. And I just consumed music. I mean, it was all I did was listen to records and want to be these bands, and so that was kind of my like getting into the computer and being able to multi-track at a young age. Part of it was like being kind of savvy on a computer and being able to find like this ripped version of software I couldn't afford. And then when I was 16 or 17 and had a car, I used to go to like Sam Ash or Guitar Center, and you just kind of like, drool over stuff in the case. And I was there one day at Sam Ash and looking at recording gear. It was like maybe at that time I had like an M box, which was like the sort of personal version of Pro Tools. But you could only do like 2 channels at a time, and I wanted to record a drum set or something. And I was just looking at the mic cabinet and stuff, and this employee at Sam Ash asked me, it's like, well, we have like 36 months financing on anything, and I was like, well,
Dangerous words.
Yeah, I was like, I'm 16, I work part-time at a used CD store. I don't really, but he had me put my household income down. So I was like, well, I guess I know what my parents make. I can put that on there. And I got approved for a Sam Ash credit card at 16 for like $5,000. And I just, without telling my parents or anything, kind of just bought, a 002, which was like the 4-channel version of Pro Tools, and some mics. And that sort of opened up my world to like recording my band as a band, like we could multi-track. And then in high school, I recorded some other bands like that I was friends with. And that just kind of grew from there, really.
I think that's one of the hardest things when you start out as a band, particularly a band with drums, is like studio time is expensive. And you to be able to have that facility to do stuff at home and make some mistakes without spending hundreds of dollars is really, really useful. Yeah.
And I remember we went and found like this studio on Craigslist, and because we needed like a demo for the band, and it was just in his house. And it was probably, like you said, it was probably a few $100s, but we did, 4 or 5 songs, and we just kind of like finished them, it was like, and that was kind of the first time I think I had ever recorded live, like a full band. And that was kind of like opening a whole new world, instead of just like, here's the click track and you build it, and or just doing something incredibly lo-fi, like with the Tascam, where it's like got 2 mics and they're pointed one left, one right, and that picks up the whole band, and it is what it is,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I had a pretty early introduction to Pro Tools, but like self-taught, just kind of like fiddling around with it and trying to figure it out.
Did you kind of hit a point where you started to think maybe the recording side of it was more interesting to you than being the musician side of it? We'll be right back with you just after this. The long-awaited Hill Country series from Collins Guitars represents a new voice in their acoustic lineup. Rooted deep in the bluegrass world, these new Dreadnought and OM models feature a strong fundamental tone with a dry, warm and woody character that's sure to catch the attention of players who hold the vintage instruments of the 30s in their highest regard. Watch world-class pickers Jake Workman, Kenny Smith and Bob Minner perform with new Hill Country instruments on the Collins Guitars YouTube channel, and learn more at collinsguitars.com. Founded in Petaluma, California, and born of a love for music, Token has developed a unique approach to making picks. Individually machined from premium materials like Ultem, Peak, and compression moulded Taulon, Token picks are designed to bring clarity, speed, and tone to your playing. Used by top artists like Chris Eldridge, Jake Workman, Andy Falco, and Trey Hensley, Token picks are fast becoming a bluegrass favourite. Follow on Instagram at TokenMade and learn more at tokenmade.com.
I think by the time I got to where I was trying to decide what to go to college for, and I feel like everyone just assumed that you must go to college, and at my age, it was not even really like a question of if, but where. And I didn't have great grades in high school. So like I visited here in Nashville, Belmont University, which is a private school and very expensive. And I didn't really have the academics to get in there anyway. And then I ended up going to MTSU, Middle Tennessee State, and which is a public school. It's a state school. So tuition was a lot lower, and it's sort of getting into college is not, doesn't really have like a high academic threshold, but to get into the recording industry, you kind of had to have certain grades and to transfer in. So I ended up staying in Cincinnati for my freshman and sophomore year of college and just doing my general education. And I still played in bands and I was like, well, maybe I'm pretty, practical as a person. And I think at a young age, I knew that having a career as a recording engineer was difficult and not necessarily a financially possibly stable option. So I was an education major, and I remember when I was like at that point where I was like, am I going to transfer for this next year and try to apply at MTSU? Kind of uncharacteristically for him, but my dad sat me down and was like, he's like, my job is not my passion, and I don't want you to settle for your career. If this is what you want to do, I want you to pursue it and at least try. And that kind of gave me the push to move to Nashville. It was kind of his encouragement, and I love my dad, but it's one of those things where like him saying that to me carried a lot of weight because it was a little out of character to be that sort of sensitive and open with me about, pursuing your dreams.
And it's easy to presume at that age that you need to follow a straight kind of obvious career path. And like so many people either know what they want to do at that age, but don't feel like it's a realistic career opportunity, or they don't know yet, many teenagers work it out later. And so many, I remember being a kid and going to careers guidance at school and saying, I want to work in music. And they went, well, that's not a proper job. So what you want to do is this. Yeah. I was like, but I don't want to do that. That's not, and so they kind of farm you off into, well, maybe you should be a teacher. It's like, I don't want to be a teacher. There was like, it felt like there was about 6 careers available to you and they just tried to shove you down one of those routes.
Yeah.
And there's so many, you get a bit older and you realize all the jobs that are out there that you could do. Yeah.
And I think my mom was a preschool teacher, and I think what appealed, honestly, why I probably chose that as a possible second career choice was you have the summers off, and I was like, well, I can be in a band or do recording over the summers, so it was still just like this compromise. It's like I wasn't passionate about being a teacher. It was just sort of like, maybe the safe route, So, and that's when I kind of moved down to my junior year. My last 2 years of school were here in Tennessee, and I've just stayed.
And what was that like when you got there, suddenly like surrounded by presumably better equipment and also lots of other people who shared that passion?
It was an interesting experience moving down here because I was at a higher grade level, so I didn't really have that like school immersion of like you're living in the dorms or you're living with all these other people in your program and orientations and all these things. I kind of like just dropped in. And it's probably, I haven't really spoken too closely with anybody who like went to Berklee School of Music or kind of took like music as a education, but it's so subjective, like sound and what's quote unquote good or bad. So that was a bit of a like adjustment period, with a few of my professors, like I remember we had this class called critical listening, which was like some of it was like, you're going to listen to this frequency and see if you can closely pick out what it is. Mm-hmm. But then some of it was like, bring in a recording that you think is a good example of what drums or vocal sound or whatever. And my professor was very into like Steely Dan, and like that sort of like recording is perfection, you know, and that was not at all my interest. And I would bring in examples of things that I thought were good, and he would be like, "That's like a 3 out of 10." You know, it's like this is a terrible recording. It's the drums are blown up or whatever it is, and I'm like, well, I don't know. When I put it on in the car, I turn it up and I sing along, and it feels good. So that was a little bit of like this push against like academia and just your passion for music, you know. And there's sort of the like the ignorance is bliss sometimes of like not knowing what you're doing necessarily, or how something is done, or listening to a recording and critiquing, you know, the snare sound. It's just like it's just a song I like, you know. So there was like a love-hate thing with school, you know. But I loved being able to get into the studios and kind of immerse yourself in like a console and having a big space. And, you know, you're so young, it's sort of like and you get these blocks of time to work in the studio, and most of it was just trying to like remember how to use a patch bay and hook it all up. And maybe you actually recorded 45 minutes of music and took 3 hours to set up, but it was always kind of fun and exciting. And I met a handful of close friends over the years who have gone on to have careers in music. And but yeah, it was very, I don't know. If looking back, it's like, I don't know if I would do it again, or if I would recommend it to someone else. But I also know that just when I graduated and had no idea what I was going to do, it kind of at least gave me this thing of like, hi, I'm a MTSU graduate and I'm, you know, looking to do anything. And that probably helped me in my initial start of my professional career.
It's really interesting, you know, what you're saying about like good sound being subjective, and it's true with like writing, with singing, with like all kinds of things. If something moves you, it moves you, and it might not be like the best sound. And there's plenty of great music that was recorded in the 20s and 30s on pretty primitive equipment compared to what we use now.
Yeah,
but, like there's plenty of that still sounds great as well. And I remember I did a degree in pop music, and I remember getting there and being slightly panicked in the first couple of weeks, thinking, oh, we're going to analyze this stuff so much, I'm going to forget how to enjoy it. And we're going to sit down and listen to kind of, air quotes, good music rather than like, and of course, like I got over myself and it was a great experience. Yeah. But I did think at first, oh, we're just going to take it all apart to the point where it's no fun anymore.
Right. Yeah. You know? And for a little while, like listening to music wasn't fun, you know, and that's sort of the sacrifice you make when you sort of turn your passion into a job. You know, it's how do you keep that love for this thing that's also like what you're trying to do, and you're comparing yourself to what others are doing, or listening to things academically, I guess, you know, just like analytically, but not necessarily musically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, like, what was the first job you got out of college? Like, what was the first thing you did?
Well, kind of what. It's funny. I had a very like. I've really only had like 3 jobs, and one of them was for about 6 months, and the others have kind of just been all connected. But when I was getting ready to graduate, you know, there, like everything, there's like trade magazines. And I remember I don't remember if it was what it was, but it was just in my house. And on the back page, there was an interview with this engineer musician, Randy Coors, who at that time was doing a lot of Jim Lauderdale records. And I think I was familiar with Jim because I liked Yep Rock records. And at in the 2000s, like, if you found a band you liked and they had a label, you would just, like, at least I would just be like, oh, I want to hear every band that's on this record label.
Yeah.
And Yep Rock was kind of interesting because they have such a wide variety of bands. And I really was familiar with them for a couple rock bands. Like, they were putting out this Canadian band, Sloan, that I loved. And this band called the Bigger Lovers, which I'm probably like their biggest fan. But then that's how I knew about Jim, and I saw that Randy lived in Nashville, and I just emailed him out of the blue and said, hey, my name's Sean Sullivan. I'm graduating from MTSU. If you need an intern or assistant, I'd love to meet. And I went in, met him, and was there for a few months off and on. It was always a little complicated for me because I had graduated, so I wasn't like interning for college credit, which is sort of the like trade-off that people make. So I was just sort of doing it to learn and observe. And but one day when I was there, I cannot remember who he was sitting with in the studio, but it was like the second year of Delfest, I think. And whoever Randy was talking to was like, yeah, they recorded all 3 days of the festival on a multi-track, but it was like a hardware multi-track, and they wanted to get it into Pro Tools. And they're like, yeah, but to do that, it's like in real time. You hit play and dump it, so somebody has to sit there and listen to a whole festival, And I was like, and they were like, and they don't have any money. And I was like, well, if they have any money, I'll do it. And at that time, I was working part-time at a gear rental company. And I thought, oh, that would be a nice way to like meet these studios, like they'd come by and pick up a piece of gear or I'd deliver it to them. And I was like, yeah, and at this place I work part-time, we have one of those recorders, so I can just borrow that or rent it at a discount. And they were like, well, yeah, great. And so I went and did that at the Butcher Shoppe, which was a studio that John Prine and David Ferguson, who I'll bring up more in this talk, I'm sure, but I'm just going to call him Ferg from now on. That's what everyone calls him. But I went down there and I met Ferg, and the Butcher Shoppe was in this, the offices of an old meat packing facility along the river. So it's this kind of worn down smokestack brick building. And then we were in this separate building that was the offices on the basement level. And it was just an open room that had literally hay bales wrapped in a packing blanket for baffles, just cables on the floor. And at that time, Ferg chain smoked like crazy, and so it's like just this kind of gruff old guy chain smoking cigarettes walking into this like essentially windowless room in the basement of this rundown part of town. And I met him, and I talked with him for about 30 minutes, and I think he got the vibe that I wasn't going to rob the place or something. And he was like, and he called me Shane. He didn't even remember my name at first, but he was like, Shane, here's the key. I'll come back on Monday, but you can use the place until then to do this gig. And I because I was just out of school, I was like, well, I'm going to document all this, and I'm going to have like really detailed notes about everyone's set and who's where, and, you know, I thought about it like it was my final exam, you know, in school, and got it done. And he walked in, and I handed him my little folder I made of all my notes, and he was like, yeah, threw that away in the trash. And he was like, why don't you just keep that key and I'll call you? And that was, I guess, 2007, 2008 maybe. And I was there until it closed in 2020.
Wow.
So a little over a decade of my life there.
And is that kind of the point you sort of drift into working more in kind of the country roots string band world, because that's who the clients were?
Yeah. Ferg is probably at that time, he was, until his passing, Johnny Cash's engineer. And he worked for Cowboy Jack Clement as his engineer. And then that led him to kind of working with Johnny. And he did like the American Series records with Rick Rubin and Johnny Cash. And Johnny had passed by the time I had met him. But I think when I sort of started working there was sort of this like transition of him not really, like that was kind of his life for a while. Like that was a big project, a lot of records, and a lot of time was spent on those, kind of taking them from what they were to what they became. And he had known the McCourys forever. He grew up here in Nashville and has known them forever, and is a bass player, and, you know, had little stints, you know, playing with Jimmy Martin, and was kind of just around bluegrass. And when I started working there, they were working on a Del McCoury record, The Family Circle. And that was like, I had never heard. I mean, I like knew what bluegrass was, and, you know, liked folk music, you know, and there were some, like singer-songwriters that I love, but I no familiarity with Bill Monroe and Flatt and Scruggs or any of that stuff, you know, or honestly, even classic country like Hank Williams, you know, it wasn't like my interest, I guess, at that time, which maybe gave me sort of this unique perspective working in that music, because I don't really have preconceived notions of how someone else did it. You know, I don't know how, like I remember, I think on that record they did, this is like, I'm going to lose any bluegrass credibility points, but it's like White House Road, or one of these, like a classic fast bluegrass song. And it kind of like blew my mind. I was just like, wow, this is like effortless for these people to play at this tempo. And Del singing, you know, then and now, it's just like so discernible. You're like, you know, it's him. Mm-hmm. And they were like so welcoming to me. You know, I'm really grateful for everyone that I've met through that studio, but it's like the kind of magic of this genre, I think, is the people, a lot of them, and just how gracious and generous they are, you know, and that family has always been that way to me. And that was a good introduction. It's like, there's no better introduction probably to bluegrass music than the Del McCoury Band. But I think them being such incredible human beings and an incredible family, and that it kind of helped me stick with it, you know.
And was there some sort of learning curve in terms of like what was required of recording that kind of string band compared to some of the things you'd recorded before? Or is it all kind of just transferable knowledge?
It's like, it's interesting, because Ferg is very, like, throw and go. He's not thinking too hard about it. It's like you put a microphone in front of an instrument that sounds good and a somewhat obvious place, and the work's kind of done. Like, a lot of times, it's like working in string band music is hard. And I say this in trying to be like as nice and gracious as I can to people, but it's like when people sort of like expect you to do a lot of things for them on the computer, and edit these things and comp these tracks and fly stuff around and take these little bits and moments and make it work. There's a little like, it's like putting a puzzle together. But at other times it's like, you just don't want to screw it up because it's going to happen in a moment. It's 3 minutes and then it's probably done, besides some fixes or something. So it was a good education in me, like trusting your instincts and trusting the musicians and just paying attention, and kind of, I just kind of learned, like the arrangements and to this day, I wish I had a better understanding of it. But just like harmony singing and listening for that. And it was sort of that's sort of the big education for me, was just like harmony and, more so than like, how do you record these acoustic instruments? Just like what is it in a successful acoustic recording? Like, what is the thing that makes it successful? And a lot of times it's arrangement, and it's not necessarily me, like it's not a genre of music where like often the production is the thing that is interesting. It's the playing or the singing or the song. So it's just trying to be like, stay out of the way more than anything,
A lot of kind of engineers talk about having like reference recordings that they go back to as like a great example of what they think records should sound like, just to kind of recalibrate their ears and just as touch points. And other kind of acoustic or string band records that do that for you, that you just think that's just a great example of? Or is it more for you always about the content rather than?
There's been moments like in time where I asked people like, hey, what are, in your opinion, like the best recordings? Like, what are your favorite records to listen to? And sort of exploring that sometimes there's a few people who come up kind of often, like Gary Pachoza was pretty important in sort of like melding this sort of like pop sensibility to acoustic music. And I go back to the Tim O'Brien Traveler record a lot. That's probably my favorite. I mean, I just love the way it sounds and the songs. So but that record doesn't translate to a lot of, because there's Kenny Malone playing percussion on a lot of it, and there's sort of this groove to it from that makes it a bit unique. And I don't remember why I had this CD. I think I maybe got it from my mom because I thought she would like it, but I had the infamous String Dusters Fork in the Road record, which sounds very rock and roll to me. Like, there's just sort of this like power to it. And it's funny, like, getting to know some of the people who were in the band at that time. It's like they're like, oh yeah, I don't ever think about that record very often. I was like, maybe we should go back and listen to it. I was like, yeah, for whatever reason, it struck me, when I heard it. And I think that was Bill Vorndick, I think, on that record. For those two stick out to me, and but it probably Traveler by Tim O'Brien. I still listen to that record for like pure enjoyment, which for me to listen to someone's music that I am really close with, like I feel very like there's people here in Nashville that I consider like, my uncles. I live in this, I moved here young and didn't have family or anything here. So Tim is one of those people for me. So it really says a lot about that record, in my opinion, that I listen to it for enjoyment, and I love, and I've heard 100 Tim O'Brien shows in my life, but it's, when he pulls out some of those songs. And when he came out with his songbook recently, I was like, oh, now I know how to play some of these songs on guitar. I can like follow along and learn. So, yeah.
I love that record. I love that record too. And so, like, your time at the Butcher Shoppe came to an end after sort of 12, 13 years because the studio stopped. And was that as a direct consequence of John Prine passing? Because it was around the same sort of time, wasn't it?
Yeah, kind of a lot of things coincided all together, like sort of the economics and geography of Nashville's changed a lot, and that complex we were at, which also had the Nashville Jazz Workshop, which was a venue, classroom space, rehearsal area for jazz musicians in Nashville. We were like the two kind of tenants, really. They had a separate building and we had ours. For a short time, there was someone above us, like a little computer, two guys on computers. I don't know what they did, but, but that property it was on kind of went from being worthless from a tax sense, like it was owned by a family of 9 siblings, and this was like a property that was left to them that the cost of tearing things down and putting something there was more than the property was worth. So it was sort of this, nonprofit, no tax place. So like our rent was very low, and but that changed to where they were having to pay a ton of property taxes, and the building in the area went from being worth nothing to being worth tens of millions of dollars. So probably about 2019, we sort of knew that the time was going to come someday. They were just going to come in one day and there'd be bulldozers and they'd be blowing stuff up and it's time to go. But it all sort of ended up falling in place to where it was like pandemic, John's passing, property being sold. It kind of all sort of the universe saying like, it's time, but it had a nice send off, like musically. We did this, Sturgill Simpson record called Cutting Grass in there. And that was probably like the last record we did. Cause I think that was like around the time like the world first opened up, or maybe we felt okay being around one another.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember that record as being that time in that funny old time we all lived through, and thinking, oh, like new things happening. This is brilliant. Yeah. So we kind of did that, and I did like one. I think just like the day before we moved out or something, we were packing up. I had like a nice session with Del and Ronnie, and so kind of squeezed in a few things to where it wasn't just like a sad close the door and
didn't really get a send off, so it felt like I wasn't really heartbroken. I was heartbroken when John passed, and that was really, because it just kind of put all that stuff into a lot of things in perspective for a lot of people. But I'm glad that my last time being in there wasn't, packing his things away for his family. Yeah. But yeah, and then it was, I think shortly after that, I started working here at the tractor shed where I am now.
And I read that like one of the studios in the tractor shed was you sort of helped design it partly to accommodate some of your own gear.
Yeah. Mark Howard, who lives at the house and built the studio, I've known for a long time. He is a guitar player, mandolin player, was in John Hartford's band for a long time, and is playing guitar on those Sturgill Simpson records. And he had another studio in Berry Hill neighborhood of Nashville that I would work in occasionally. And this property was Grandpa Jones's property. He lives in his log cabin home, and the studio was the tractor shed. This is where he kept his tractor. And he has always had studios. So Mark is in his mid-60s and had had a lot of careers in music, and but just had always had studios and has built them himself and refurbished houses. And so I think it was kind of like a project for him, and I don't think he ever really necessarily thought it would be so busy, but because it's a little outside of town. But so when he finished it, he kind of did the control room and kind of a main room that's not huge. I mean, it's maybe 20 by 25, maybe, I don't know. It's hard for me. I'm terrible with dimensions, but not large in a Nashville studio sense. But, and his thought was like, I can put a string band in here and we can make records, for fun, or, if somebody needs it. And I really had no idea where I was going to go. It's like you're in the pandemic, so you're like, well, I'm not going to go anywhere right now, but I have all this stuff just piled up in my basement, and, starting to get asked to do things and again. And, there was a period of my life where I was working at Compass Records pretty regularly. And I was like, well, maybe I can just work out of there a little more often, kind of rent the studio from Gary and Allison. And, but when Mark finished this studio, I kind of approached him about working out of here. And I think the first thing we did was, this Mighty Poplar record.
I love that record.
Oh, thank you. That was like such a joy to make, because it was sort of all of us being let out of our houses for the first time in a long time, especially for Noam and Chris, because they had young children. I think Noam had just had their first kid, and he was like, I don't think he had left his house before he had come to the studio since March. So it was just sort of this like joy of them getting together to play music and get away from what we had all been going through. And, in that record, it's like that record, everyone's in the same room together, and it's pretty close. And, but it worked, and to where clients that I had from the Butcher Shoppe would come here and we'd work on things. And it got to the point to where it was busy enough to where Mark thought we could justify finishing out the second half of the building, which he had meant to keep just for storing his tractor. But, so we finished out the other two rooms, and then in the last year, he added on a kitchen which has been a godsend to have people have a place to go. And so it's kind of grown organically, and in a very DIY way that I admire. It's so many studios in Nashville now are owned by colleges or huge corporations and or just outside money. But I mean, everything in this studio is like Mark or I built or wired, so it has a very you feel a connection to it, and that's special to me. Like that kind of time, like being a kid who kind of grew up in DIY rock music and punk music, the sense of community was always important to me, and community and bluegrass and folk music and the sort of making it work aspect of the genre is a parallel that I see and connect with. So that's sort of the correlation of sort of
and there's something beautiful about that Mighty Poplar record as an example of that. You were saying about the sort of string band world being about people, and all of those guys are in other bands.
Yeah.
Other successful bands.
Yep.
And that's something, you don't get that in other worlds where people are in a bunch of bands and they come together to have another band, and then they might go off and do a solo record, and they all come back and they've got 2 or 3 things on the go. And it's a lovely thing because you just get this cross-fertilization of stuff and you hear new people's things. And you were talking about that record and recording in a small room, and it's funny, and this probably makes no sense whatsoever, but you can almost hear the eye contact in those sessions.
Sure,
when you listen to that record, it's so intimate in so many ways, and it's just such a beautiful listen.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's all them. It's all a tribute to them. But that I think was important to that record. I mean, they're all, 5-6 feet away from one another. And maybe we even tried to do no headphones. It's like you could almost. I mean, that's something that if you can do it is an incredible thing. Like if you can all agree upon mixing yourself and blending yourself and sort of accepting, flaws or mistakes and playing for the greater good, it really can't be beat when recording. Having this, headphones are kind of a necessary evil, but can be sort of disastrous in terms of just everyone listening to a different thing. And so if you can do it that way to where you're not relying on that to hear things, and being in eye contact is important. Those things really, like you said, it's you don't really understand why something sounds that way or why this music feels more connected or just like you said, it was feels like people are breathing at the same time or moving at the same time, or sure, the tempo might fluctuate, but it's all happening together and it's natural. And I think that closeness and eye contact is pretty key to making that happen on recordings.
And it sort of comes back to what you were talking about right at the beginning, and the idea of both communication and community, and the idea there are some beautifully engineered records that leave me cold, and there are some wonderful bits of music that are essentially you don't really get a better record than Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska.
Yeah,
but that is not a record that is going to be held up as a fine example of recording by anybody.
Sure, yeah,
but that's the magic, right?
Yeah, and that there's this band from Dayton, Ohio, Guided by Voices, that were really hugely influential for me because, it's just all their records are for a period of time were just made in their garage, and they're out of tune and they don't sound good, but there's something about like the sort of low fineness of it that makes it almost more mysterious and interesting. And I remember Jake Blunt, this fiddle player who's also an academic, he kind of came to this realization that those sort of like source recordings of fiddle tunes, he's like, I think I came to the realization that it wasn't the playing that I was drawn to, it was just the sound of them, which I always thought was really interesting. And, like when you listen back to the sort of, the seminal recordings of bluegrass music that aren't necessarily recorded by today's standards well, especially things in the 40s and 50s, you kind of wonder, like, what impact would those people have had today? But they sort of made the limitations of technology almost work to their advantage, because it's like undeniable that this is a good song or good singing or the passion in the voice, because it's like you're not being fooled by this like immerse hi-fi listening experience. It's like, and it's like movies now, it's like a lot of music can be that way too, where it's like it leaves you cold because it's all not real, and I think you can hear and feel realness and liveness, and it's an interesting like progression for me. With it's like I'm not the kid anymore in the room, it's like I was always the kid, and now there's times where I'm like the oldest person in the studio, which is kind of like, it feels like they just hit me this year in particular. But I've seen sort of people my age and peers kind of go through this progression of their own playing and writing of like going for perfection and destroying themselves playing and emotionally, and just like pushing themselves so hard to sort of accomplish these things that push their skills as far as they can go. And it's making those things sound effortless, but it's immense effort and concentration and just striving to do things you haven't heard or didn't think you could do in the studio. And those times as an engineer, it's like I might have to sit and listen to 100 takes of this solo. And it's sort of like being put in this like intimate place of like seeing into someone's world and how they create and process, and just being like patient and letting them work it out, and trying to observe like, when does it feel appropriate to give input, or is there something that they're stuck on that maybe I can help with, just with a simple term or phrase, or be like, hey, listen back to this thing that happened 20 takes ago. I think you were onto something, and maybe, so I've kind of seen people my age and musicians kind of go through that period where they're kind of like, I need to play banjo as good as Bela Fleck did on Drive, or, and my fiddle playing needs to be as good as Stuart Duncan's, or these people that, the sort of like peers, you're the legends, and, and then it sort of changes to where it's like, actually, my instincts were right, and my first attempts or my second attempt really was appropriate, and it's good. I need to accept that it's good, and moving on from that. Yeah.
It's so funny because when I interviewed Noam about the Mighty Poplar album, he said, they like recorded it all pretty quickly, came out with some rough mixes, and then spent a long time like mixing this record, and kind of ending up at the realization that like it wasn't that far off in the first place, but you're getting these little loops of looking for perfection.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily, like, I guess in terms of records I've worked on in terms of what I think of as a long time. Like, but I remember there being long stretches with that record of like, we recorded it and then it, you know, there's a little like putting or finding the best take or maybe putting a piece from one take onto the next take. But because of everyone's schedules, I remember there was a pretty long gap before we put like harmonies on it. So we didn't do that live. All the lead vocals on that record are live. But then it was sort of like a year later, I think we had a day in the studio to like sing harmonies. And then I think a year later, it was mixed, you know, and because that was when everyone's schedules lined up. And God, Noam is an incredible presence in the studio. And I remember there was one song, it might have been, I can't, that kind of fast instrumental that he does. And, you know, there's a tendency, and for me anyway, sometimes it's like you like focus on the minutia, you know, and like trying to turn up every little bit of something that happened. And I probably like overworked that song. And, there was a moment where we like just kind of set baseline levels, and he just said, okay, from here, nothing gets turned down. He's like, we're just gonna, if something doesn't seem loud, we'll just turn it up. But nothing should ever be quieter than this. Like, we should never be like sacrificing someone else for someone, you know, and which is sort of like, sometimes you get into these things that are just like so simple. You're like, oh, let's just get this to a place where like it all sounds good, not touching anything, and it feels kind of settled. And then when someone needs a moment brought up, we do that, but not start with the tweaking and the, you know, mining of stuff. And that was a good like perspective shift, you know, of just being like, oh yeah, we're overthinking this, you know, and that's easy to do, where you kind of get hyper focused on a singular bar of music and you kind of forget the other 5 minutes. Yeah, you lost the plot, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and all those details, you know, like it's sort of like you talked about before, you know, all of that work goes in, and then you sort of want to leave it at the door and come out with a piece of music that communicates something of one person to another person, regardless of any of that.
Yeah, you know, and it's, I think when I try to think about like why I continue to work in this genre, because and I'm so blessed to work with people with such talent that really could work with anyone. And sometimes, you know, when you're in your own thoughts, you're like, why in the world are they working with me? It's like, what do I have to, I can't offer insight on like what to do on the banjo, you know, or something, or like I can't give too much. I can't help you arrange a 3-part harmony. If you know, I can tell you when something's right or wrong, but I can't sing it back to you the way it should be. But I think it's sort of like my patience for things like that is sort of maybe my skill beyond like an audio engineer or being able to produce a string band. It's sort of like I think I have the perspective of like, it takes as long as it takes, and it's, you know, you're not inconveniencing me exploring this thing because it's forever. And I think it's like, for me, I'm here every day in the studio, and this is like my 9 to 5. But for most people who come to the studio, it's something they only get to do once every couple years, or may only do once in their entire life. So you kind of have to keep that perspective of like, they have to live with this forever. And I'm not going to tell them that like it's good enough, or, you know, hey, we got to go to lunch or whatever. It's like, I'm here. I'm grateful that you've like let me into your creative process, which is very intimate. And I don't ever want you to think about me in here being like inconvenienced or annoyed that, you know, it's taking you 15 minutes to get your instrument in tune. You know, it's like, it's fine. And I've never really asked anybody, but it's like, well, maybe that's my superpower, just patience and understanding. And, you know,
I think sometimes those kind of like, and a music producer and engineer, like the roles can cross over, and the role of producer is so varied depending on the project but sometimes the more kind of human skills are the more important ones than being able to put the mic in the right place and understand. Like lots of people can do that, but what lots of people can't necessarily do is help somebody midwife a difficult musical baby. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, it's like this job is really psychology, you know, and when I think about records I worked on, it's the things I remember are like the human interactions and the relationships with the people, a lot of times more than the music. So I think like that's important to like, for me, it's like the things I value are the friendships and the time I get to spend with these people, not just like getting to hear them create music and helping them, you know, be the person that takes this thing from the room to the speakers, but also just like the friendships, you know, and it's like you're in this like intense relationship with people while they're making a record for a very short amount of time. And then there's often where you don't see those people for a while, you know, but you have this like connection and bond that like when you do see each other, it's like there's this sort of like understanding. It's like family, you know.
It's funny, making a podcast is sort of similar in that like I can spend an hour chatting to a musician, a producer, a writer, or whoever, and we are the only two people in that conversation for that hour, and it's a really intimate thing. And like, I may never see them again, I may never talk to them again. Like, it may be over a video call like this, it may be in a studios, but you share a thing, and nobody else is there for that. And that's why I do this. Really, I just enjoy the conversations and the connection, and to get to spend on like what for me here is a, you know, random Tuesday night in my week. Yeah. I get to spend an hour having conversations like this, and I love it. And I've very much loved this one. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Yeah. It's been, I'm the people in this genre, and I'm sure you've experienced this interviewing them, you know, it's like they touch your lives in a short amount of time and an immediate amount of time. Sometimes it's with music, and sometimes it's just their personalities and their like the kids would probably say their aura. It's like there's just certain people, it's like you're around them and it's like, I understand this. It's like you make me a better person. You inspire me to be a better human. All these things, and it's like, and also you're an incredible singer, or you're an incredible musician, and you write beautiful, poignant songs, and it's like, what a treat, you know, to get to do that for a living.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.